Hello and welcome to the Move Your Business Forward podcast. These talks are hosted by Rob Boll, founder of Evoke Management and CEO of International Leaders UK. He'll be talking with experts from both these companies about issues that affect SME companies today.
Welcome to this edition of the Move Your Business Forward podcast on the topic of the big squeeze. Many companies are still facing these challenges of inflationary pressures, prices going up, costs going up, impact on margins, still struggling with supply chain, and finally getting good people, retaining good people, and keeping people happy. So this episode, we're going to be talking about some of the best practices and some themes around employee health and well-being. I'm joined here today by Stephen and Nick, who are both commercial directors on my team at Evoke Management. And we're just going to talk about a few things that help position your business, your environment to be a good place to be from employees' health and wellbeing perspective. Nick, I know you've got a few thoughts on this already, and I think there's lots we could talk about here in terms of all kinds of stuff. But I think starting off by focusing a bit on the workplace or where people hang out together, how can we make sure that's kind of as best as it can? So Nick, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Rob, for having me today. Really important to create a positive, pleasant environment. I think an SMEs are not, they can't afford to build surplus resource into the business. There is very little to no redundancy in staffing. And therefore, it's really important to create an environment to ensure that you keep hold of your employees, and keeping hold of them is more about really the environment than the job itself. So people tend to leave environments rather than jobs. So they leave environments that they don't want to be part of rather than leave the job itself. So critically important to create an environment that is pleasant, supportive, and conducive to good performance.
And I think the worst example of that is a real toxic environment or a toxic piece of the business that then kind of bleeds out and impacts others. And you've had experience of that in business, haven't you? Any thoughts around how to identify that? And because I think some people might not even notice that's going on, but I think it's identifying it and acknowledging it and thinking the impact that's going to have on your employees' well-being and sense of enjoyment of being in the workplace.
Absolutely. And in my experience, the founder was the last person to know. So that had manifested itself for a period of time. It wasn't overly obvious to me, and only when it came to a head did the full impact become realized. So in that situation, there are different ways of tackling it. Get to the root cause of the problem. If it's a particular individual, try and ascertain why they're unhappy. Make every effort to see whether you can change the situation to ensure that they are happier. But ultimately, if an environment is being damaged, the work environment is being damaged by an individual, and you've tried absolutely everything, well, then there's little choice but to remove that person from the environment for the benefit of everybody else, because it will, as you've said, that a toxic environment will very quickly pervade and be very damaging to all the employees, all the people that you want to keep in the business and prosper.
An interesting you commenting from my experience, as the founder, and I think this happens. Sometimes you can be the last to know about these things, or you don't see the bits that you kind of should be aware of. How did that come about, or how do you think people could avoid being the last to know of something quite critical like that?
Well, it's got to be continual communication. I think if you create a coaching environment within the management framework rather than a command and control framework, if you talk to your employees regularly, you discuss with them the day-to-day issues that they're having and empower them, but at the same time support them to think through the problems, then maybe it'll become more obvious sooner. But I think there is a reticence. Sure, we've all experienced it. There's a reticence to blow the whistle at the end of the day. And therefore, these things can manifest themselves without the founder necessarily knowing what's going on, because people don't want to mention it. So only when it comes to boiling point and boils over does it then become obvious. So I think that in my experience, regular communication with the staff and really trying to understand the day-to-day struggles and getting to the bottom of it is more likely to give early warning of problems in the organization.
Yeah, no, 100% agreed. Stephen, what's your experience of this? And at the moment, talking about the kind of the worst of environments that are going to have a natural impact a negative impact on employees' kind of feelings, thoughts, health, and enjoyment. What's your experience of that?
I think a lot of SMEs do not devote enough time or investment into actually teaching leadership. I think you get it, particularly in SMEs, where there's a tendency to promote people who are good at the job. They have a particular skill, but not necessarily because they're a good manager. As a result of that, they become blockers in an organization. So whilst in some ways, or many ways, we are attuned to the need to focus on the health and the well-being of the employees in the business, often the people at the top of the organization aren't necessarily in tune with what's happening further down, because they've got middle management or even senior management who are not sensitive to what needs to take place in the workplace, and don't actually have a plan to bring the people through, and aren't necessarily good coaches themselves. I think it's one of those things where often I think there's a resistance to change in companies, and people do leave environments, as Nick said, but they often leave those environments because they don't see the opportunities, or they see somebody who's potentially a blocker to that opportunity. So we get obsessed at the moment, I think, about some of the more sensitive areas without recognizing that actually one of the biggest motivators is a sense of achievement, sense of responsibility of being in an organization. That actually is empowering in itself, that you're well thought of, that you can actually contribute to your company and to the people around you, and that makes you feel good as well. Yeah. It isn't just about some of the benefits that sit alongside it. It's how good do you feel. And if you have working in an organization where you don't get that good feeling, you will go somewhere where you can find it. Yeah, or try to find it.
Yeah, no, that's great. I think one of the big challenges here is getting that communication and feedback sorted, and especially with people working in different locations, remotely, hybrid, whatever it is. I've actually been looking into bits of software to help with this, to help with kind of employee engagement and just feedback loops, whether it's suggestion box type stuff, or whether it's just getting combination of anonymous and knowing who the person is type feedback. And I think there's some wonderful bits of software out there to cheaply embed and demonstrate you're actually taking action, you're listening, and you're doing something about it. And I think as an accountant by background, numbers for kind of managing employee well-being, happiness is a real struggle to capture. But I think there's some wonderful programs out there now to enable you to actually capture, get data, make sense, and make decisions. Have you guys seen that kind of feedback loop and communication work really, really well, and how companies have excelled? Steve, you're nodding, so you must have some good examples of that.
I'm not sure I've seen the final result yet of one particular initiative that's ongoing at the moment, but it's quite a refreshing. What's the word? A refreshing approach to a particular issue they've had, and the results look very promising. So I'm looking forward to seeing what comes out at the other end in the longer term. But yeah, certainly there are some. What's really nice, I think, is that not just are there these tools, but there are a number of organisations that are approaching training and development quite differently from some of the old school ones, which look awfully moribund now, and coming at it afresh, and actually looking at things through the eyes of the employee, as opposed to the eyes of the people that are running the businesses is quite good.
Yeah,
different perspective.
Nick, what about you? What have you seen the kind of the best in class kind of processes and methodologies to get this kind of communication and feedback going back and forth?
Yeah, I think there's been a change in perception and needs. So I think the younger generation have different expectations from their career development, and I think they think more broadly generally about their career. So dare I say it, the loyalty to one organization and the expectation that one might work for that organization for a considerable period of time that might have been around when I first started work 35 years ago, whatever it was, is no longer the case. So, the younger generation don't really expect to be in a job for perhaps more than 2 or 3 years in some cases, in some sectors. And while they're in the job, they also expect the company that they're working for to be considerate and supportive of their career development. So there are different expectations, but if you can support somebody's career development, recognizing the fact that they don't expect to be doing the same job for the next 10 years, then you're going to engender as much loyalty as you're likely to engender if you're supportive of that career development. So I've worked with organizations that are very focused on that and support the staff to qualify to take on courses, to take qualifications that may not be completely relevant to the job that they're doing, but they're supported in doing it because the employer has their career in mind, which I think is important these days.
I think that raises an interesting point, and I think it does come up. How much kind of should you say yes to, in terms of the request? So if you ask all your staff at different levels, different ages, different backgrounds, what do you want from the work environment? What should we be doing as an employee, and trying to get that feedback? You can have a very long list of things that can start looking very expensive and time absorbing in terms of we've also got to get the job of running the business done. You got any thoughts of how you kind of put some kind of boundaries around that? The wanting to ask people what they want, but not having to say yes to everything.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with you. If you built up a list, I'm sure you'd have a list. You'd have a member of staff wanting 4 months holiday, and somebody else wanting loaves of bread and butter in the kitchen. You can't agree to it all. Communication's key. So the things that perhaps you don't feel are conducive to the work environment in which you're trying to create as the founder of the business, well, then you need to explain why. And as long as there's the communication there and the rationale for why, acceptance of the fact that you've heard it, but a discussion and a rationale as to why you're not prepared to agree it is important. But yeah, I totally agree with you. You can't agree to every single member of staff's wants at the end of the day. I think there's a difference between wants and needs.
Yeah.
Needing is very different, and if there are fundamental needs that the staff have, then you have to go that extra mile to meet them. But if it's wants, then there has to be a degree of common sense.
Yeah, no, 100%. Stephen, any thoughts around that?
Yes, I think it comes back to management again, and the strength of management and understanding and getting the balance. Because what's happened with a lot of companies, certainly in the last couple of years, with the paucity of good people about, is that A lot of managers have fallen over backwards to try and accommodate everything their employees need or want. I think want is the right word there. And sometimes have lost sight of quite a lot of other important stuff. And there's been this anxiousness to try and appease everybody and keep everybody on side. And ultimately, you get a funny result out of it at times that it sort of becomes the lowest common denominator. People then are all treated exactly the same, and some of the people who will naturally rise to the top are perhaps not encouraged and not supported to do that. And people do like to be in winning teams as well. So I think it's a case of being able to recognise what's important in supporting the staff at every level, but also recognising that there will be people who want to succeed as well, and being able to give them the opportunity to do that, and giving them the succession planning and development, or the scope to grow their own careers and their personal development. And I sometimes think at the moment we've lost a bit about the people in trying to cover all of the benefits.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think, as Nick said, the key thing is to acknowledge why things are done and not done. Yeah, if there's a bunch of requests or things people want, just making sure you're clearly addressing, we're not doing that, and there's a reason why, makes it a lot more easy to understand. And some things that might not be possible now because, you know, when there's too much work in a business and you can't give people more flexibility, or if you can't put people's pay up yet, you know, you can communicate the fact that we want to do all those things, but we can't do them now. But if we achieve this, we can. And you're kind of taking everyone on that. With some of the stuff we could talk around in terms of employee health and well-being is I guess some of the softer stuff and some of the stuff that's outside of the business. You know, people that, you know, giving the option for employees to spend more time doing things they want to do within the time frame they might be working, and this could be, you know, flexible working, people having more time to just take time out, breaks, all that kind of stuff. We haven't really talked so much of that, and I think there's a whole bunch of things there that we could easily have another conversation on. But I think just to kind of wrap this up, I'm really keen to talk about top tips around the stuff that's within your control. So when people are within your environment of an office or during the workday, if they're working remotely, we've talked about a few things about toxic environments, but just interested to get your thoughts on what are your top tips for any business, the things that's definitely in their control, things you can help employees with in terms of their health and well-being within the remit of being in the office or being within the working hours of the business. Any top tips on that, Nick?
I think it comes down to trust and leadership. So, you know, pick up on what Stephen said about leadership, which I think is crucial. Too often people are promoted into positions because they are particularly good at a job or have been high performers in a particular area, and they're promoted into a position where they're expected to lead and manage people when they're not, you know, often had very little or no leadership training, which, you know, then ends up in a potentially negative scenario where you've got somebody managing a team of people and they're not trained to manage those people. So, and the trust, you know, at the end of the day, from the leader's perspective, the manager's perspective, they have got to trust in their employees. That's crucial. There's no quicker way to dampen somebody's enthusiasm if they feel they're being micromanaged. So my top tips would be trust the employees, you know, and train your leaders. And if you can create an environment that is positive in that respect, then it will undoubtedly impact performance positively.
I think one thing on that is the businesses don't always get that right. People that you think are going to be the next best manager for a particular division or area, or when people think that's what they want to do, when they actually get into that position and there's more pressure, there's more things to do that isn't just what they've always been good at, which is their role. There's the management of people and all the other pressures. sometimes I think people don't just rethink and go, actually, maybe that wasn't the right thing to do, and let's go down a different route. And I think sometimes that can be quite difficult for everyone involved to go back on and go, actually, we have promoted that person for that role, but actually, in hindsight, it wasn't the right thing to do. We're going to make that change. I don't know, Stephen, if you've had experience around that of how best to deal with those. It's not necessarily mistakes. It's you've tried something and it hasn't worked, so kind of accept it and do something about it rather than just live with it because you've given someone that title.
Well, yes, I'll comment on that. There's one other point coming back to something that you were asking Nick earlier. I think the key to the last point is that you have to have a succession plan. And SMEs are very poor about having a proper succession plan. It tends to be reactive or brought about by pressure from somebody saying, I deserve promotion. I think you need a plan about what you want your organization to look like. Is it a flat structure? Is it a hierarchical structure? What fits the expectations and ambitions of the people you employ? What fits the company? And then you develop your plan about the long-term aims, and you allow people to see where they can go in the organization. That stops this kind of knee-jerk, I'll just push somebody up this chain. You've got a hierarchical structure, and you've got people there that are blocking other promotions, then it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Mm. So you need to be much more creative about how you look at the organization. I think that's one thing. And the other point I was going to make, which is not directly related, something that Nick was talking about earlier, in terms of communication. There's a lot of interest at the moment of B Corp, and it has 3 principles, which is people, planet, and profit. And I think the profit element is important, and that's the communication bit. You can't do anything to support the people or support the planet if you're not making any money to do it. Mm. You can have all the nice words, but that kind of communication has to happen in the organization so people understand what pressures the company faces and how it can react to those pressures and how the money is being spent and distributed and so forth. So they have an understanding of a much bigger perspective of the company and not looking at it just from the employee's point of view. They are more, what should we say? They're more integrated within the organization and feel they have a voice and understand why why the company's doing certain things. I think that actually helps as well. So that communication is really vital.
Yeah, no, agreed. Thanks for both sharing your ideas on that. We're actually out of time for this, and I will see if you guys have got any final thoughts. But I think the big thing that just comes back to me from everything you guys have both said is this is not something to have as a kind of knee-jerk reaction. It's not something to be reacting to. You've got to proactively plan for this, and whether it's thinking about succession and progression opportunities for your staff, and thinking about what are the long-term plans, visions, purposes of the business, and linking in some of the things from B Corp. This should be something you're evolving to, developing things to get to, rather than just going, how do we improve this today, or what should we have done to stop that person leaving or that person being really unwell and unable to contribute to the business. I think this is part of a longer term plan, and I just encourage anyone who thinks they haven't got this right or wants to validate their thinking, we'd love to have a conversation with them, because having a different perspective on things is super useful. Nick, any final thought or one bit of piece of advice you'd leave this with?
Yeah, I think it's undoubtable that happy, healthy employees increase productivity. Yeah. Without a shadow of a doubt. Yeah. So it's crucially important. Companies are largely people.
Yeah, no, agreed. And Stephen, any final thoughts? Tip?
I don't think so. They are, as Nick says, they are the company's most valuable asset, and they need to be treated like that.
Excellent. Well, thank you both. I've enjoyed the chat today, and hopefully some useful things for people to listen to. So thank you both.
Thanks, Rob.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like more information about the topics discussed in this podcast, then you can find us on our website at moveyourbusinessforward.com.